There have been various cavalry units throughout history that have shook the battlefield to its core, and in some cases has changed the tide of battle. You had the famous riders who fought all through North America. You had the Huns, the Mongols, the chariots of the Bronze Age, and the mounted knights of Western Europe. Yet standing high above them all is possibly my favourite military unit of all time. The cavalry force to propel Poland and Poland-Lithuania into one of the dominant powers of Europe. The cavalry force that Sabaton would write a song about. The Winged Hussars. The Winged Hussars appeared in the latter half of the 16th century and were based off of earlier light hussars that were drawn from Serbia, Ukraine, Russia, and predominantly Hungary. The first hussars used by Poland were Hungarian mercenaries that, once their effectiveness was shown, became a permanent fixture in the Polish army. Eventually, as the training grew more rigorous and the military unit gained more prestige, it would begin drawing the nobility into its ranks. The Winged Hussars would also begin developing their distinct look, and yes, I am aware you all want me to talk about the wings, but honestly, we're going to avoid stealing too much from Metatron's video, and we're going to save the best till last. The Winged Hussars wore a tailed pot helmet, which allowed the wearer to have a decent amount of visibility, whilst not getting stabbed by very sharp objects that were flying towards you. For the chest and back, they had the relatively standard breast and back plate. They were fairly flat. It was nothing too fancy, you know. They also had matching tassets, which protect your thighs. Underneath all of this armour, they would wear a kaftan-like garment, which a kaftan is like an Eastern robe sort of thing. Is very nice and smooth. This garment was decorated differently depending on your financial status. And you know, if you was just a little regular person who was in the Winged Hussars, you probably wouldn't have it that decorated. But if your dad was incredibly rich, you would get a nicely decorated one. It didn't really have much padding, so it acted more like something for called an arming doublet, and that basically just offered a lot more manoeuvrability without weighing the Winged Hussar down, which again actually makes sense when you think about it, because the last thing you want to do is snap your horse's back in half. The final piece of armour that the Winged Hussars wore was their full plate arm harnesses, which obviously, well, protected their arms. Yet surprisingly, they didn't wear any gauntlets, which is a sort of metal glove. Again, they did this for manoeuvrability, so that they had more grip when holding reins, so that they had more grip when wielding weapons. And that's very key, because again, when you're charging at someone, you want to have manoeuvrability and you want to be able to control your weapons. If you're trying to fire a bow and arrow at someone, but you can't really get a good grip, you're going to be in trouble. So obviously, the Winged Hussars' armour was mainly designed for manoeuvrability and the ability to control their weapons. So let's quickly talk about those weapons. The most prominent of their weapons is the one that you've definitely seen on TV shows or on the various artworks of the Winged Hussars, because they're always holding them, is their 6-metre long lances, which are a brilliant design because the average lance that they would come up against was 5 metres in length. The Polish designers, somewhere in history, literally said, we're going up against 5 metres. What do? Add a metre. Oh yeah, and they were also designed to shatter on impact. This design was brilliant though, because you could obviously charge at the enemy, shatter your spear, which means that you could possibly get 2 or 3 guys if you get one in the throat and it splinters and then chunks are going off in their faces. And then you just go back and get another one. of course, when they weren't ramming their large, long, thick lances into you, they had a weapon that could trace its origins back to the Far East, the sabre. This particular sabre of the Winged Hussars was they would literally charge at you, same with the spears, and then they would just slam this into the face of whoever they were going off against. So if you didn't get done with a large, long spear, they'd whack your face with a sabre. The most skilled riders were even known to use bows, and they were so good they could give the Mongols a run for their money. That's how good they were at this point. Eventually, later units, like a lot later on towards the end of the Winged Hussars run, would carry pistols, as if to, you know, really hammer home the parry this you fucking casual that the Winged Hussars just gave off. We're going to come into the sponsor break pretty early this time, but you know what it is, because we all know who is sponsoring me. Me! And the best place to support me is obviously on Patreon, where there is a 4-tier system with a variety of perks, the most basic of which is access to Discord, which I am in, and also allows you guys to talk amongst yourselves and be like, this is a cool history thing, oh my god, History Daddy's here, worship him. There's also access to things like my videos 48 hours earlier. You can even maybe have your name at the end of one of my videos, or all of them. But yeah, don't forget I also have an Amazon author page with a book. If you like books, you can read my book. If you're not vibing either of those, just like and comment and share, and hopefully subscribe. Just get my work out there and help me build an audience, and I'll appreciate all of you. Now I know all the comments are going to currently be, why hasn't he got to the wings yet? Where the hell are the wings? This is what we came for. Well, shush, because Daddy is talking and he's about to get to the wing. The Winged Hussars, in fact, had another nickname. And trigger warning here, as we are going to be talking about unlifing, so if you're like me with a bit of thanatophobia, you may want to just skip forward. There'll be timestamps and stuff. But their other nickname was the Angels of Death. And this is purely because of the wings attached to their backs. Because they would charge over a hill or charge towards you, and the silhouette would look like a ton of angels coming at you. We do actually have some evidence that the wings were attached to their backs, but there is also evidence that it was attached to their saddle, and there was also evidence that it was attached directly to the horse. I think it's most likely like the saddle. That seems like the most secure place to me. I don't think it was attached to their backs at any point. There's too many sources taken, too many different things, which I think was on purpose, because obviously you want some mystery about your elite unit, don't you? The wings also held things like eagle feathers, ostrich feathers, or goose feathers. I don't know why geese are in there. This also does all leaned in to the mystique of the Winged Hussars, because obviously a big chunk of their ability to win battles was the oh shit, there's the Winged Hussars moment that you would get when you saw them barreling towards you with large 6-meter long lances that are going to shatter in yours and your best mate's face. I don't even think it was the sight of the wings that scared everyone. It was what those wings meant. Because after a few outings, word spread of what the Winged Hussars were capable of, and slowly the sheer sight of those wings meant you knew what was coming. We're going to look at the actual highlights of the Winged Hussars, some of their best moments, so that you get a taste for what is coming in the bulk and the big chunk of this video. In 1621, saw 45,000 Polish fighting off against 170,000 Ottoman forces. Because, you know, the Polish wanted to make it a fair fight. The Winged Hussars did what they did best and just kept coming at the Ottomans, like literally hammering at their lines until there was nothing left. They just ripped through the ranks. And at one point they charged with just 600 Winged Hussars. And they charged at 10,000 Ottomans. and they pushed them all the way back to their camp. The Winged Hussars would actually top this when they went against the Crimean Tatars, when 400 would charge against 40,000 in 1692 at the Battle of Hodou. Again, I've definitely mispronounced that. Now, looking at the main course, the thing you all knew I was going to talk about, and because I've made at least 7 TikToks on it because it's one of my favourite historical events. The Siege of Vienna. Now, with growing tensions within Habsburg-controlled Austria, the Hungarian Calvinists, led by Ibri Toloki, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but let's be real, half of you are watching this just for my mispronunciations, would contact the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, Kara Mustafa Pasha, and he would beg them to attack the Habsburgs, particularly the Austrian capital of Vienna, which had already been besieged by the Ottomans over 100 years ago at this point. The Ottomans were keen for round 2. Mustafa, however, was slow to act. He said yes, and he got the Ottoman Sultan's permission. The Sultan, in fact, was actually quite excited for this chance, because again, Vienna. But his slow march actually gave the defenders some serious time to prep their defences and make their plans. The Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor, Leopold I, would flee the city like a wimp, and after leaving, Ernst Rudiger von Staurenberg would be placed in charge of its defences. Rudiger would get Jorg, I think that's Jorg, Rimpler, an insanely good engineer who had seen the Ottoman siege tactics firsthand, to draw up some plans. So Pope Innocent XI would go to the King of France, the 14th of his name. Can you guess what his name was? It was Louis! Congratulations! Will you help the Ottomans? But Louis wasn't really a fan of the Habsburgs, so he checked his computer and it said no. Leopold, however, had a different strategy. He would go to John III Sobieski, who did have a defensive pact with Leopold. Sobieski was the King of Poland and the Grand Duke of Lithuania, whose birthday was on the 17th of August, which I completely forgot about and just missed, and actually was a few days before my first video. So, happy belated birthday, Sobieski. Sobieski was understandably nervous at first, because, you know, the Ottomans, there's a lot of them. But he did come round, especially when he realised that he wasn't going into this alone. You see, Pope Innocent hadn't been completely useless. He had convinced Charles of Lorraine and the electors of Saxony and Bavaria to join in, plus 30 other German princes. Yep, this is a story about the Germans and the Polish coming together to save a city in Austria. Eventually, the Tatars would begin raiding the surrounding countryside of Vienna. The Tatars were like auxiliary almost to the Ottoman army. But they would begin raiding the countryside to try and starve out the defenders, who had already gathered most of the food. So the Tatars' reaction was, well, let's just kill everyone. You know, I don't want to go into details because it is a bit upsetting. But just know that we are really hoping for karma to just slap him in the face in this one. And who knows? Maybe karma will be 6 meters long and shatter easily. So Vienna's defences would end up being completely overhauled by Rimpler. He would ignore the north and the east because they were protected naturally by the River Wine and the Danube. Which means that he could focus purely on the south and a little bit of west. For this, he would go through Vienna's bastions and its outworks, completely reinvigorating the city's defences. The southern side was covered in a series of ditches and trenches, and these were layered back as well, so there was multiple ways of defending the city at any given time. On the 14th of July 1683, the defences were put to the test for the first time as 150,000 Ottomans turned up, consisting of troops from Wallachia and other client states, as well as the famous Ottoman Janissaries. The Ottomans were here and they meant business, and this, for them, was their chance to gain a serious foothold in Europe. This is where the bravery of the Viennese really did come into play. On multiple occasions, they would sneak messengers through the Ottoman camp to the emperor and then come back again. Although as time went on, people were asking for more and more money to go out and do this. One famous story was of a noble who went out and delivered the message and then came back and then set up a coffee shop with the coffee beans he found from the Ottoman camp, although there's not actually a lot to verify this claim. The Ottomans struggled to set up their cannons and do any real damage because, for one, the defenders actually had more cannons than them, and two, the Ottoman cannons struggled to get in range because they couldn't get close enough before they were pelted themselves by a hail of cannon fire, which obviously you don't really want. However, the Ottomans went back to their old ways and began digging trenches. They began pushing forward with these trenches and also started work on their tunnels. Eventually, they would have a closer cannon position set up, and they would begin making their move into the outer city walls. And on the 24th, 2 mines would explode outside those city walls, and the defenders of the city would actually have to place a man in every basement to listen out for digging. It was getting serious now, and they needed help. As I mentioned earlier, the Ottomans had already tried to besiege the city in 1529, and so they began to lose heart because it was taking a serious amount of time, because they could get up to the city walls, and every single time they would get pushed back, and it began to move into a sort of semi-Cold War type situation. In one of these skirmishes that happened because of mines exploding, Rimpler would actually be severely injured, taken back into the city and die. And with him, Vienna's last hope seemed to be gone. It was after this that the Ottomans broke through the outer walls and began charging towards the bastions and the outworks, and found they couldn't, because Rimpler had laid this out as another delay. And the Ottomans, instead of charging in, were hit by another nail on the head and were forced to dig trenches and tunnels and repeat the process again. This caused the defenders to pull back between their 2 bastions. The situation also worsened because they were running out of food. The only upside to this was the Ottomans were also running out of the food because the Tartars had burned the last of it, so the Ottomans had to pull food from even further away, which slowed their progress even more. The situation very quickly turned, though, and got harder for the defenders because obviously they had nowhere to get food from. They had their stores and that was it. Suddenly, however, as all hope seemed lost, a coalition force of 70,000 arrived just in the nick of time. After some discussion, Charles and John led 2 portions of the coalition army through the Vienna woods without any provisions. What this said was to the men was, this isn't going to be multiple pitched battles. This isn't going to be a counter siege where we try and starve them out. We're going in, and we're going in hard. And on the 12th of September in 1683, the coalition army began its attack after a message was received of "there is no time" from the defenders, although it wasn't exactly those words. I can't exactly remember those words. Mustafa began to prepared himself and defended his sieging force with 80,000 men. Who immediately found themselves being rushed by imperial armies on their left flank, Polish-Lithuanian armies on the right. This went about as well as you think it would for the Ottomans. This was a moment in history that literally would decide the fate of Eastern Europe and perhaps the whole of Europe. This also led to the moment. The largest cavalry charge in human history, consisting of 20,000 cavalrymen. And at the front of this 20,000 strong cavalry charge were 3,000 Winged Hussars, led from the front, like a real man, by Sobieski. After 6 hours, the Ottomans were pushed back to their camp, and the defenders, seeing the tide of battle turn heavily in their favour, charged out from the city and joined the fray. The Ottomans very quickly realised that their asses had just been handed to them on a plate and legged it. The downfall of the Winged Hussars and the partition of Poland-Lithuania. This story doesn't have the happy ending we were after, however. Vienna is saved, and the fate of Eastern Europe lied safely in the hands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as well as the Holy Roman Empire, two powers that were about to decline. As Poland-Lithuania began to face more adversity within its own borders in 1702 at the Battle of Klisau, the Swedes would utterly destroy the Winged Hussars. In 1772, the first partition of Poland would be put into effect by Prussia and the Russian Empire. In 1776, the Polish Parliament would officially abolish the Winged Hussars in favour of a more modern cavalry. The second partition of Poland would come to pass in 1793. I'm not saying that getting rid of the Winged Hussars was a bad idea, but a hero of the American Revolution, General Tadeusz Kosciuszko, I apologise for my pronunciations, again, as always, would try and rally the Polish to defend their homeland one last time, and this last act of defiance would be crushed by both a coalition force of the Prussians and the Russians. Yes, history does like to repeat itself. The third partition of Poland-Lithuania saw the last remnants of this once mighty Commonwealth split between Prussia, which would go on to form the German Empire, and the Russian Empire. This also marked an almost 200-year period between 1795 and 1991/1992 that Poland would be occupied in some way, either by a foreign power or as a puppet government. And when they did gain independence, it was for extremely short spells. A similar story would befall Lithuania as well. Still, the stories of these absolute mad lads would echo through the generations and would inspire one of the greatest power metal songs of all time, and would begin my fascination with the history of Eastern Europe. And as bad a hand as the history did deal the Winged Hussars and their countrymen, we will always remember in September when the Winged Hussars arrived. See you in the next one.